lecturer today is Dr. John Van Leer. He is a professor at the University of Miami, right next door to the Rosenstiel School. He's been there for quite a few years. He's done a lot of research in ocean dynamics, and you'll also notice on the chairs we have some surveys. Those are for the end of the lecture. We'll pass out pens for you to fill those out. It's just some demographic information and just to find out kind of what you've learned. A lot of our programming is funded by government grants and things like that, and this information will be submitted to the EPA for our current environmental education grant. The more information we can get from everybody, the better. Dr. Van Leer has brought with him some constituent comments for the Citizens Climate Lobby. Those are in the back of the room if you want to grab them and fill them out. You can give them back to him and he'll submit them to representatives so that they know what you want done or what you're thinking as far as, what kinds of policies we should put in place or what your ideas are. And finally, I just want to acknowledge we are going to be live streaming this on Facebook, and at the end when we're doing questions, we're also going to be incorporating a few live Facebook questions. And with that, I will hand it off to you, Dr. Van Leer.
Thank you. It's time to get busy. So, I'm going to give you a little bit different talk tonight. Instead of the usual doom and gloom, I'm going to talk about a bright future we could have if we make the transition away from carbon-based energy systems to renewables. Pays well, and I think you'll find it an interesting change of pace. When you go to a typical climate talk, I think a lot of people at the end feel like it's hopeless and that there's really nothing they can do. Present business as usual juggernaut is very fine with that. They like to continue burning fossil fuel as they do. They'd be perfectly happy to do that. So this is going to be about the alternative view of actually being proactive. So here are the take-home points I'm hoping to make. First one is that global warming is an observed fact. When people ask me, well, do you believe in global warming? That means, do you believe in thermometers? Do you believe in tide gauges? Do you believe in correct measurements? Because there's no doubt that global warming is real. It's scientifically well vetted. It's old science has been known well over 100 years. That global warming will happen if we increase the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. So the second one is reversing global warming is possible and profitable. You notice I didn't say easy anywhere in that. It's not easy, but it can be done. But it has to be done rapidly, it has to be done decisively. We can't sit on our hands and whistle. We actually have to get involved and do things. Thirdly, you can make bipartisan progress in Congress. I know that sounds impossible, and when I tell people I'm going to Washington to lobby Congress, I usually get remarks like, good luck with that, and yeah, you got to be kidding, or are you crazy? There are several ways of describing that, but we actually are making progress in Congress. And the key to it is personal empowerment. If you get busy and engage with Congress, it makes things happen. You can think of democracy as a muscle. If you use it, it gets stronger. If you leave it alone, it atrophies. And so we're in a place right now where people leave it to the professional lobbyists who get paid a lot of money, and they do whatever they like to do. So it's up to you to get involved, and if you've never done it, you might find that you might think it's challenging, but it's actually not a difficult thing to do. So the good news. There's a freshly published book about less than a year old called Drawdown, and this book is the first time that I've seen solutions to global warming gathered in one place and analyzed by a uniform technique And it actually shows that you can, over 3 decades, make progress on global warming. And if you implement all the 80 solutions that they actually model, you would make something like $74 trillion compared to the present carbon-related energy system that we're using today. So it's far more profitable than what we're presently doing today. Of course, you might ask who profits, and the people who are in the present business like what they're doing because it is profiting them. Just for reference, in 2016, there were 36 gigatons of carbon emitted. So that's a sort of a benchmark as we go through the talk, something you can use a yardstick to think about where we're going with this. So there are, in addition to the 80 solutions that were modeled, there are 20 solutions that are promising, that are not well enough known that they can have models put on them and calculate the number of gigatons of carbon that are either sequestered or avoided. Those are the 2 basic ways you get less carbon in the atmosphere. You avoid putting more carbon there, and you take carbon out of the atmosphere. And it's safe to say at the point we are now in the climate system that we have to think seriously about how we're going to sequester carbon that's already in the atmosphere. So this is an extremely positive book. There's a copy of it on the back table. Look at it, but don't take it, because I'd like to continue reading it. So it's a really neat piece of work, and I'll give you a little taste of it. Not enough time to go through it in detail. So this is a pie chart showing the different methods in drawdown that are modeled. And there's some things that are really quite surprising if you haven't thought about this. One of them is the biggest sector here, this blue one up here, is refrigeration. And managing refrigerants is a really big deal. You may remember the hole in the ozone layer and the change of refrigerants in order to cure the hole in the ozone layer. Good idea to do that, because if you have less ozone, you're going to have more problems with skin cancer and things of that kind. However, these new refrigerants, many of them are very aggressive greenhouse gases. So you solved one problem and you created another one. It only is a problem if those greenhouse gases get loose if you let the refrigerants go, so it's going to be necessary to manage those refrigerants closely. Second one is, no surprise, wind turbines on shore. The third one and the fourth one are kind of interesting. Reduce food waste. That's the third most important thing that you can do. The United States wastes an incredible amount of food, and it ends up oftentimes in landfills in an oxygen-deprived environment, so it turns to methane, which is not a good thing. So then, plant-rich diet. Turns out that eating meat is a major way to generate greenhouse gases because cows make rude noises, among other things. And so there's a lot of methane involved in the raising of cattle. There's so if you go to a plant-rich diet like the Indians did traditionally, then you have less emissions. And then tropical forests, that's been well known. Then the next two, educating girls, very big deal. The education of women, turns out that a woman who grows up in a developing country and is raised in a traditional family is likely to end up having 5 children, whereas a woman who has an education may have more control of her future and might be more likely to have 2 children. And since most of the issues with global warming scale with the population, that's a big deal. And of course, family planning is part of that as well. And so then you get the things you might expect. Solar farms, this is the kind of thing that FPL is starting to do. Silvopasturing, rooftop solar, that's something you can do yourself. It's possible to put a solar array on your house and it can pay itself off in about 4 or 5 years now at the prices we're probably getting for solar panels. This is becoming very doable. And you go down the list, replanting forests or things that you might think of, rebuilding peatlands. There's a lot of carbon that was in peatlands, such as the sugar growing regions near Lake Okeechobee. Those things had peat that was like 10, 15, 20 feet thick in places, and now it's down to maybe a foot or less. What happened to the peat? Basically it oxidized and is now in our atmosphere. So rebuilding peatlands is a big deal. Afforestation, which is tree planting, that's something that many people would think of. And there's all kinds of regenerative agriculture that's a profitable thing to do. Sequestering carbon, at the same time you're growing food crops. A twofer. Now this is nothing new. The Amish and the Mennonites in Pennsylvania have been doing this for a couple of hundred years. So if you dig up an Amish field, the soil looks black because it's got so much carbon in it. We should be giving those people money for sequestering carbon because they're helping the climate. So I'm not going to go through all of these things, but they're, and this is the bad news. And the need for speed, why we have to make the transition to renewables really quickly, because of things that are going on in the Arctic. So we're in a race with the melting of Arctic sea ice and the permafrost that's largely on the seabed in some very wide continental shelves in the Arctic. If we delay this too much, we will have a problem with rogue methane releases from the seabed, and essentially that could overwhelm the climate system. And because these are not methane gases that are being produced in an active way, there's no shutoff valves. It's coming out of the bottom spontaneously. And so there's not a valve you can turn off. It's not like a gas well where if you did your plumbing right, you can turn a valve and stop the methane from coming out. And so there's a very good book called A Farewell to Ice, written by Peter Wadhams, who's one of the foremost authorities in the world on sea ice, and sea ice is a very big deal in this situation. So the need for speed, too, this is the second part of it. The question is, which nation or nations will dominate renewable energy? This is the growth area of the future. This is the industry we must have. Who is going to dominate? That's the question. Our present administration puts a lot of emphasis on the fuels of the past like coal, and not so much emphasis on the future. So I'm standing outside of Gigafactory 2, also operated by Tesla, up in Buffalo, New York. And they are going to build two main products here. One is the solar shingles that you may have seen, which gives you a new roof and solar cells and guaranteed for your life. Pretty good deal. And then the other one is a super efficient solar panel, much higher output per unit area than the competition. And so these are two critical products. One really interesting sidelight is it's being done in Buffalo, and the original Nikola Tesla was the first person to generate AC power using the power out of Niagara Falls to power his turbines. Together, Westinghouse was the money bags behind it, and Nikola Tesla was the brains. So in 1896, Tesla harnessed Niagara Falls and sent the power an astounding 35 miles to Buffalo, unheard of. In the day of DC current, you could only go about a mile with the system that Edison was selling. So that was a big deal. That turbine system, or its successor, is still making power, so Tesla's making renewable energy devices using renewable energy. So they're not generating a lot of fossil fuel emissions. This is an enormous factory, 35 acres under one roof. When you go inside of it, the corridors go to the disappearing point. You'd need binoculars to see the door at the other end of the hall. Just an enormous facility. It's built on a brownfield site that Republic Steel polluted for over a century and left for dead. And so it's being cleaned up and repurposed to make solar panels in the USA using highly automated, highly efficient production technology. If you haven't been to a Tesla factory and seen how these things operate, holy cow. So this is showing the major sectors in that drawdown. And in the upper left corner, for example, with food, over 3 decades, you could hope to avoid or sequester 321 gigatons. So that's considerably larger than the 36 gigatons we put in 2016. So these are some powerful techniques. Electricity generation, 246 gigatons. This is over 3 decades. Wind turbines, solar farms, rooftop solar, geothermal, nuclear is down the list there. Turns out that Miami has geothermal potential. We have cold water offshore flowing south beneath the Gulf Stream. That water is like 60 degrees or colder Fahrenheit, and you don't have to lay a pipe out to get it. There's porous limestone, something called the boulder zone, where the porosity is so big you could swim through it with scuba gear if you could stand the pressure. And so you can just drill a vertical well down about 2,000 feet here in Key Biscayne and get some of that 60-degree water and reject heat to that rather than to hot air. The efficiency of geothermal cooling is quite significant, and if we were as progressive as the people in Iceland are, we would be distributing cold water in pipes so that people could have efficient air conditioning. And there are some places on Key Biscayne that have peak pumps that work on shallower wells, and those are quite a bit more efficient than rejecting heat to air. So there's the women and girls, land use, tropical forest, things of that kind, temperate forest, peatlands, afforestation, and so forth, things you would think about. So there in the materials is the refrigeration management. And building in cities is not all that big a portion of this, and transportation is not as big a sector as you might think. So electric vehicles are up there at the top, 45.7 gigatons. Ships, mass transit, and trucks, I'm going to talk a bit more about those. So, newsflash. Renewable solar achieves grid parity in New Mexico and Texas. Isn't it time to do this in Florida? You know, we're the Sunshine State. It's not as sunny here as it is in New Mexico, but we can still do pretty darn well. And this is some data republished by the Rocky Mountain Institute. It shows the levelized cost of energy for utilities in 2017. And the one that's at the bottom here is onshore wind, then crystalline PV, and then natural gas. So 2 of the primary renewable energy sources are cheaper today than natural gas is, which is abundant because they overdid the fracking boom, and natural gas is selling at a cheap price right now. So this is a big piece of good news. This little glitch in the PV had to do with governmental policy. I think Trump is trying to give us another glitch with his tax on Chinese cells. We'll see how that works out. But I don't think that Trump or anybody else can stop this. The price has come down so far that I don't think you can put the genie back in the bottle. People may try. So bottom line is, if you're burning carbon, you're burning money, because it's cheaper to do it with renewables. The other thing that most people don't talk about is you're actually wasting a lot of water. When you run a big steam cycle, like FPL does down at Turkey Point with those nuclear power plants, you're evaporating a whole lot of water. That water is disappearing. That has a big effect, especially in places out west where there's not that much water to begin with. Blowing a lot of water vapor up your tower is not a great idea. So wasting water is a big thing. Anything that uses a steam cycle is likely to waste water. Here's some data from Bloomberg News for what they expect over the next 22 years. The renewable sector, zero carbon is shown here as they're forecasting 86%. Fossil fuel, new installations, 14%. The big money boys has figured out what's happening. This is not a surprise to them. So number one is wind. Number two is solar. The nuclear is a little misleading because that's not in the United States. That's primarily in China. It's in India and other places. God forbid, Pakistan. Anyway, and then you see gas and coal way down the list. So renewables are cheaper today. How about less than 2 cents a kilowatt hour for wind power? That's really stunning. I don't know if you look at your electric bills, but you're paying somewhere north of 10 cents a kilowatt hour, probably 11 or 12 cents, depending on what your rate structure is. That's less than 3 cents per kilowatt hour for solar PV medium bid. So what these bids are is big operators putting together a giant wind farm or a solar farm and then selling the electricity on contract, long-term contract, big money. So the real shocker today is that even including electric storage, including the batteries to store the energy, people would point out, you know, wind goes away sometimes and sun doesn't shine at night, so you need to have something to make up for it. Well, we have batteries. Elon Musk has been busy, and wind is now just over 2 cents a kilowatt hour, and solar just under 4 cents a kilowatt hour, including the battery storage. We know how to do this. This is not rocket science. I used to do rocket science. That is hard. This is not a big deal. This is not hard. So we need to have, you need to turn your mind around. We've been thinking of energy in terms of gallons of fuel or barrels of oil. Forget it. The new unit of measurement is the kilowatt hour. That's the new gallon. So my Tesla has an 85 kilowatt hour battery. It's like saying you have a 20-gallon gas tank. Same basic deal, except you didn't have to burn carbon to get those kilowatt hours. So here is the biggest factory on the planet. This is Gigafactory 1, built in Nevada, close to a lithium mine just by chance. It's going to make 35 gigawatt hours of lithium batteries each year, and it's going to do it 30% cheaper than anybody else on Earth can do it. And it's going to have net zero energy consumption. Biggest factory in the world not using any energy from outside, not burning fossil fuel. You can see some windmills up here on the ridge to the right. You can see one of the biggest solar arrays right here, and it has geothermal for heating. And if they happen to need to store a little energy, for God's sake, they're making batteries. Yeah, so this is an enormous factory. The front end of it is lithium recycling. So when you turn in the lithium-ion batteries from your laptop, chances are they're going to end up in the front end of this factory being recovered. It's an amazing thing. You'll notice also it's aligned. It's a long linear building. It's aligned with True North. And so when Elon lays out his machinery, he just uses even numbers on his GPS gear to locate his equipment in the factory. This is an amazing thing. He built a battery for Los Angeles while he was building the factory. Think about that. Holy moly. And he had to build this factory whether he wanted to or not if he's going to build the Model 3 in the quantities that he's going to do it. But the big surprise for him is the demand for solar power walls has greatly outstripped what he thought it would be. So now he's having to split the battery output with battery storage as well as car construction. I think one of the most interesting statistics is you could store all the energy to operate the world if you had 100 of these factories. That's not an infinite number. If we were as serious about fighting climate change as we used to be about fighting World War II, we would, by God, be doing that. We'd be building these things really fast, and they built the batteries in 3 dimensions. And the assembly lines run so fast, you have to use slow-mo cameras to visualize the batteries, otherwise everything is just a blur. I mean, this is an amazing factory in every respect. So, this shows renewable energy buy-in by tech-savvy companies. And you see back in 2012, there was just Google and Apple out here. And then you saw Facebook and Microsoft, Google get involved, Volkswagen and Delphi and Apple. And as you went through here, 2015 was a banner year, again, primarily tech companies. And then there was a dip in 2016, again due to change in government policy. And now, 2017, in addition to what you would think of as the tech-savvy companies, we have some things that are there as well. You see Anheuser-Busch in there, you see J.P. Morgan, you see General Mills, you see Anheuser-Busch again, PayPal obviously. So in Miami, we have IKEA, Miami store. The top of the roof in IKEA is paved with solar panels. And the owner of IKEA was asked, is this going to make money for us? And he said, this is the right thing to do. We're living on this planet. By God, we should put solar panels on our roof if we can do it. So when you have enough big players getting involved, then it trickles down and the smaller players can do it as well. This is one of my favorite graphs. It shows projected sales by Bloomberg New Energy Finance of electric vehicles growing up, and internal combustion still rising for a little while and then beginning to come down because post-Paris, national governments have made commitments to reduce their emissions, and one of the ways they can do that is by converting to electric vehicles. So that's a really big deal. There have been some government mandates declaring that there's going to be an end to selling internal combustion engines in a number of European countries. If you go to Norway today, you will notice that over half the new cars are electric. You can take a Tesla taxi cab in Bergen. I know I did it. The other BMW and the Nissan Leaf and all that are selling a lot of cars because Norway has huge hydroelectric potential, and so they don't need to burn fossil fuel. They're even converting some of their ferry service to electric power. So you can drive long distance for free for the rest of your life. That's what I'm doing. You can speed up the U.S. transition to electric vehicles by buying a Tesla S or X if you've got the resources to do that. That'll help speed the process. The Model 3s are now being delivered in Miami, and the ones that are being delivered today have all the sensors necessary for fully autonomous driving. So even senior citizens who could no longer normally drive, or drunks who shouldn't drive, can get their way home essentially using the autopilot functions. So my Tesla has covered 72,000 miles. It has avoided 2 accidents for me. It is by far the best car I've ever driven of any kind whatsoever. It's the safest car. It's an amazing thing. It regenerates. So when you go to stop at a traffic light, you back off on the accelerator, and it puts electricity back in the battery. So you can use it again. You don't get all of it back, but you get about 85% of it back. So when you're going downhill from the Continental Divide in Glacier National Park, you're gaining range. It's like you're putting fuel in your tank. I mean, it's quite an amazing thing to see. And so you use your brakes for the last 5 miles an hour. So your brakes are going to last for millions of miles, literally. You hardly use them at all. So to say that I'm happy with a car is an understatement. The only disadvantage is when you have to rent a car someplace, you got to go back to the world of fossil cars. And they will disappoint you once you get used to this. And this is even more exciting than the cars. This is the new Tesla Semi. And they're being sold in two ranges, a 300-mile range and a 500-mile range. And the prices are projected to be $150,000 and $180,000 respectively. That underprices diesel trucks. Why? Well, it turns out there are very few moving parts. A diesel engine has hundreds of parts in it. Tesla motors have one part, the part that rotates. And there's going to be a motor attached to each of the four drive wheels. That means you can regenerate, just like my automobile does, but it also means you can regulate the torque and prevent things like jackknives. And when you're going downhill, you're regenerating just like I do. And so your range is increasing. You're not putting any stress on the brakes. There won't be any more runaway trucks that have had brake failure. If you go out west, you'll notice that there are ramps next to the road where you go up a steep grade. That's where you go if your diesel truck is running away from you. These trucks will go up the steepest grades on the highway system at full highway speed. No shifting, no transmission. You'll never replace a transmission because there isn't any. You'll never replace an exhaust system because there isn't any. I mean, you go down the list of all the things you can't replace, pretty damn amazing. And so this truck has a net savings, operating savings of $200,000 a year compared to diesel. This transition is not going to take near as long as the automotive one. Because these guys, you know, if you have a 2-year payback time on a truck and it has a 1,000,000-year guarantee for brakes and other things, and you can do the diagnostics on the fly. So you can add 400 miles range in 30 minutes of charging, and they're installing a group of mega charger networks that are solar powered, so that you'll be running a fleet of trucks on sunshine, not fossil fuel. So and Elon is guaranteeing a cost of 7 cents a kilowatt hour, and these things consume 2 kilowatt hours per mile in round numbers. So you can see it's not a very expensive thing to run a giant truck hauling 80,000 pounds of cargo up and down the Rocky Mountains. This is a pretty good deal. So in convoy, where you can stack one truck behind the other, which you can do because of the radar functions, they will use less energy than freight trains on rails. Think about that. And then it turns out they're already in action. Tesla semis are already transporting the lithium-ion battery packs from the Gigafactory in Nevada to the assembly plant in Fremont, California, which is an amazing thing to see. If you know somebody with a Tesla, get them to take you through it. It's unbelievable. In 2018, hydropower, which has been relatively constant, the capacity doesn't change much because we've developed almost all the good sites for hydroelectric dams in the lower 48. There's some in Alaska you could develop. So there's no big change in that. However, they're going to put in another 8 gigawatts of wind capacity, so wind is going to cross and outperform hydroelectric in 2018. And so that's a big deal. So wind can grow almost without limit. If you take a ride out west, like I did, and look at the ridge lines, there's wind turbines all over the place. The farmers in Iowa are getting rich on wind because in the wintertime when the soybeans and the corn doesn't grow, the wind blows like hell out there. And so if you own your own windmill, you could be making the order of $100,000 or $200,000 a year. That's pretty nice income. If you let somebody else install it, it's probably $10,000 to $20,000 a year income without you having to do anything except deposit the checks. Pretty good deal. Now that we know that renewable energy is possible and practical and economical, how do we drive the transition forward? And it needs to have some kind of an economic stimulus that runs across the board. Not everybody's going to have the time to learn about the ins and outs of solar or wind technology. And so if you have a price point, that'll move things. So what we need is a change that has to happen fast enough, and steadily increasing fee on carbon where it enters the U.S. economy. So what Citizens Climate Lobby, that group is putting forward, is starting off with a $15 a ton of emission, going up $10 each and every year into the future, so that carbon products become, and especially fuels, become more expensive. And that would hurt the economy, except that we're proposing a full refund of the money to all of the households in the United States by direct deposit, like a Social Security check. Some of you look old enough, you might be experiencing Social Security checks. I know I do. So it's kind of nice to have something drop into your account every month, and that's what this is. And by making direct deposits to households, it means that it becomes durable. It's the same thing that the people with the Trans-Alaska Pipeline did. They gave a check to all the people in Alaska, all the residents, and so now they become big fans of the pipeline because they like that money coming in every year. This would be monthly. After 10 years, something like $400 a month for a family of 4 is what it would amount to. So significant money. This is called fee and dividend, and the beauty of this policy is it's a solution multiplier. If you're familiar with military, there are things called threat multipliers, which are things that make the battlefield more dangerous. Well, this is the opposite. This is a solution multiplier. And so this is named after George Shultz. It's called the Shultz-Becker Plan. George P. Shultz is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute, which is arguably one of the most conservative think tanks on the planet. And so it is a free market capitalist policy to drive the carbon transition. If the capitalists don't make money on it in the United States, it's not happening. We live in a capitalist society, whether you like it or not, that's where we live. And so the solution has got to earn some money or it isn't happening. And so this actually drives the carbon transition. So growing monthly refunds to make it more profitable for all you U.S. households yearly, and it makes all 80 drawdown solutions more attractive every single year that this fee is in place. Now you have the money to execute those things. CL works in a bipartisan way. We are a nonpartisan organization. We do not take sides. We talk to absolutely everybody because this is everybody's problem. And so we started something called the Climate Solutions Caucus, which is bipartisan, and it started here in Florida. And you might wonder, why in Florida? Well, turns out sea level rise has become a well-known topic in Florida, and if you're a politician and you try to claim that it's not happening, that's not going to be such a great approach. And so we got Carlos Curbelo, who comes from the Florida Keys, Republican, and we got Ted Deutsch from Broward and Palm Beach County. We are now up to 36 Republicans and 36 Democrats. Why is it equal? Because that's the way we recruit, 2 by 2. The Noah's Ark method, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, 2 by 2. So if you have a Republican who wants to join, he has to find a Democrat or vice versa. This caucus has been growing by about 3 pairs per month since the last election. We are moving the needle on Capitol Hill. That's the part that I find exciting. I've been operating with these guys for 5 years. For the first 2 years, we had 0 Republicans. And people would say, are you nuts going to Washington? Why are you bothering lobbying with those people? Well, turns out it makes a difference. I went to a meeting at the American Institute of Architects about a project to build on Hudson Island, and there was concern about traffic, and there was a concern about parking. Those are the 2 issues. And I asked at the end of that, has anybody taken into account sea level rise in the design that you just presented? Well, after a little hemming and hawing, they said, well, no. And so Maurice Ferre, a long-term member of the city, or mayor of the city of Miami, was on the panel, and after the meeting he came over to sign a constituent comment form like the ones you can get at the back table. And while he was filling it out, I said, you know, Maurice, we're a couple of gringos trying to get cooperation from a largely Hispanic community. We don't have a clue what we're doing. Can you help? And so he said, I asked that he meet with us. So he met with us for an hour down at Coral Bagels. And he said the key to the whole thing is whether Ileana Ross-Latham will go along with this or not. She is the senior representative in South Florida Republicans. So she is the dean of the Republicans. If you don't get her, you don't have anything. And so he said, here's a list of 20 people that she considers key allies. You need to work on this list of 20 people. And then he got out his cell phone and he started dialing those people and said, hey, here's Maurice. I've got some people from Citizens Climate Lobby and they need your help. That's the way each one of these conversations started. And so after 9 months, 7 months of detailed preparation, 6 meetings with her staff, we produced a 65 signature letter signed by the most important mayors, chambers of commerce presidents, and university presidents, and a few scientists like me. We finally got a meeting with her on Capitol Hill on June 23rd, 2015. So here's the meeting. I am explaining to Ileana about the Arctic and what's going on there. I know she's anti-communist, and so I said we were up there to research the ocean under the pack ice so it would help the Navy catch Russian submarines. You know, that's very good. And so I said, but while we were there, there was a hurricane strength Arctic storm that blew up. It laid down 3 feet of snow on the level surface. It's like lake effect snow, only it's ocean effect snow, a whole nother scale. And it upwelled water from deep 300 or 400 meters below the surface, which is warm Atlantic water, which has been there for a long time. It mixed with the surface mix layer and continued to melt the ice even after the atmosphere got down to minus 40 degrees C. Amazing. And the people who've been going to sea there for 30 and 40 years had never seen a storm like this before. So that's how I introduced the subject. This is a typical kind of a meeting. We have the order of a half a dozen people. Each person takes a role. We're thankful, we're polite. If you want to get agreement from somebody, you don't shake your fist at them, generally. And so we thank them for something that they've done. In the case of Ileana, she's been very helpful in raising money for projects at the University of Miami. So that was an easy thank you. And then we have a timekeeper that asks how much time we have so we don't overstay our welcome. We have somebody who records. And we have somebody who makes the ask, who asks for what we actually want to accomplish in the meeting. So it's very structured. So if you're a newbie, you might be the timekeeper until you've been to a couple of these meetings, see how it runs, and then work on. So this is after the meeting. This is Julie Lambert from FAU over here. Greg Hamra, who's the CCL leader in Miami, what we call the Ground Zero chapter. You might be able to guess why that is. Jay Butera, who's our senior strategist in Congress. And here's Ileana, the Honorable Ileana. And these two gentlemen are essentially students. Stephen Kane on the left, who does shark research at Erasmus. And the guy on the right here is a business major at Barcenas, and yours truly. And in Jay's right hand, you see this paper here. He had commissioned a poll in Ileana's district asking what people's attitudes were about climate change, because she didn't have an idea exactly what it was. And he used the polling firm that she uses. And 82% of the people in her district wanted action to reduce global warming and climate change. Well, if you're an elected official and you ignore what 82% of your constituents would like, that's probably not a real good recipe. So she's joined the Climate Solutions Caucus. He's been a real leader. So this is what a lobbying day looks like. This is the 2015 iteration. 900 citizens posing on the Capitol steps before 2 days of lobbying. In 2016, we had 1,000. 2017, 1,300. And you could be one of these people in 2018. There's still space available to sign up to go to Washington and speak to your Congress people. So this is doable. It's June 10th and 12th, 10th through 12th. It starts off with meetings at the Shoreham Hotel, and then it goes to the Capitol Hill. We now have enough people, we can do it in one day. We can call on every office in Congress that's willing to have us. So we're a force to be reckoned with. They're now pushing 100,000 people in CCL. So we're beginning to make an impression. People say, well, what about China and India, the emerging economies? What are you going to do about them? They burn coal. Well, there's a border adjustment for that. They have to pay on the carbon content of their goods if they're going to bring it into the country. If they don't have a carbon tax, then we do. The interesting part of it is with the recent change in administration, we may be the ones paying the border adjustment to China and to Canada, because Canada has already got a $50 a ton price on carbon that they've declared. It's going to take a couple of years for it to phase in, but we're going to be paying the Canadians in order to bring the goods into Canada, eh? So we modeled this. We had a mock negotiation amongst China, U.S., and Canada, which exposed the U.S. vulnerability to border adjustments assessments by China and Canada. So here's an event by CCL. You might recognize the guy on the right, Charlie Crist, and Representative Lee Zeldin from New York. They've come down to talk about the impact of climate change on real estate. Topic near and dear to the hearts of a lot of us. So here's a picture of one of my favorite speakers, one of the best speakers in history, a guy named Winston Churchill, and his words still resonate after 80 years. He said, owing to past neglect, in the face of plainest warnings, we have entered upon a period of danger. The era of procrastination, of half measures, of soothing and baffling expedients, of delays is coming to its close. In its place, we are entering a period of consequences. We cannot avoid this period. We are in it now. And of course, what he was talking about was the rise of fascist dictatorships in Italy and Spain and Japan and in Germany, propelled by the big weapons makers in Europe and Asia who were profiting by this buildup. Of course, 80 years on, Churchill's prescient words almost perfectly describe our present situation as we face looming global warming catastrophe situation. So we've been procrastinating, we've been fiddle-fooling, we've been messing around, but we haven't been coming to the point. So here's the plainest warning. Here is one of my favorite people, Dr. James Hanson, testifying before the U.S. Senate in 1988, 99% certain that the warming trend was not a natural variation but caused by a buildup of carbon dioxide and other artificial gases in the atmosphere. He's a plain-spoken guy. He is the son of a tenant farmer from Iowa who worked his tail off to become the lead climate scientist at NOAA. So here we are 4 months after his warning. This is the 3 feet of snow on the ground because of this hurricane strength Arctic storm. It created 3 feet, and after the snow sits there for a week or 10 days, it fuses into a solid. And so you can walk on it. And you can take a snow saw and cut it into blocks and make an igloo. And since I live in South Florida, when am I going to get a chance to make another igloo? So I bought a snow saw for that purpose. And on the right we have Warren, who's a Colombian native, Umberto, and on the left is yours truly. This was an amazing thing. The people who were on the ship, some of them had been in the ice 35 and 40 years, and they'd never seen a storm like this. And the fact that it was warm enough to melt a hole in the pack ice covering the Barents Sea was pretty amazing. And so this was my aha moment for global warming. This is when it was no longer a theory, but something that I needed to pay attention to. I recently bought a waterfront house in Miami. And so when I saw this, I said, uh-oh, you know, how long do I have before the sea comes to call on me? And the answer is it's calling. During the last hurricane, I got 8 inches of salt water in my garage, which I considered lucky of him compared to what I could have had. So this shows we were driven down the wrong side of Spitsbergen, and we went through the Straits of Patoya, a pinch point. And so the pack ice that we had instrumented shattered, and we lost about $1 million worth of ice and ocean sensing gear. 15-year-old Arctic ice floes, I counted the horizon in this ice because I cut holes through it. So I know it was 15 years old, and it was 5 meters plus thick. 26 tons of ice I removed from a hole to lower my instruments through the ice. So I have a very visceral sense of what it is. So you can see the 3 feet or meter of snow here, and then there's a meter of freeboard on the ice, and then there's another 4 or 5 meters of ice underwater. So this is, you just don't see this in the Arctic. Nowadays you see 1 or 2 meters of ice. Old ice is 2-year-old ice. So it's a completely different thing from what it was. So past neglect. Those warnings include warnings from high-caliber scientists working for the major oil companies like Shell and Exxon in the 1970s and 1980s. The oil companies knew this was coming. This was not a surprise for them. And in fact, New York State is suing some of these same oil companies based on the fact that they misled their stockholders by not disclosing this rather significant thing. And we've known since 1896 that this was a problem. Silvana Reines calculated a 4-degree Celsius temperature rise should be expected if we doubled the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Of course, he thought that was never going to happen. We are in a period of consequences. The unusual intensity of hurricanes, wildfires, and droughts, floods, mudslides in 2017 are obvious symptoms of our neglect. So it turns out that there were 16 events that cost more than $1 billion in disaster, and some of them considerably more than that. These low latitude storms and symptoms got ample coverage by the press, but we're not even yet at the +2 degree level, which is our so-called safe level by global warming deliberative bodies like the UN. I don't think it's safe at all. More than 93% of the global warming exists in the world ocean, where it's out of sight and out of mind. There's also 40% of the CO2 is dissolved in there, which is why we have ocean acidification, which is not doing very nice things for our local corals. The most obvious effect of this heat is the thermal expansion of the ocean, which accounted for about half the sea level rise so far. Ocean current systems deliver this heat and salt to high latitudes with melting effect under sea ice, glacial ice, and on the underwater methane-rich deposits of permafrost on the continental shelves. You might wonder how in the world you get underwater permafrost, because under seawater. Well, it turns out the sea level was about 400 feet lower during the last ice age maximum, and so those continental shelves were above water. So they formed permafrost and then they were drowned. But they've been under cold water since then. So serious consequences have become evident further north. Disappearing pack ice in the Arctic Ocean reduces solar reflection from about 60% to about 10% in the areas that are open water. That's a huge change. Reducing the sea ice area constitutes a readjustment of our global thermostat. And if we lose all the sea ice, the impact on global warming will be equivalent to 15 or 20 years of emissions. I mean, it's a huge thing. Warm Arctic waters are melting the permafrost on wide continental shelves in East Siberia, where they're 1,000 kilometers wide, the Kara and Laptev seas. There are plumes of methane coming to the surface. like fountains of methane coming out of the seabed. And on land in Siberia that's nearby, there are 7,000 craters, 100 meters or bigger in diameter, that were formed by methane exploding up through the permafrost as it warms up. All of the above are accelerating the melting of glacial ice cap in Greenland, which is doubling every 6 or 7 years, and is a growing component of sea level rise. So something that doubles, if you could find an investment that would double every 6 or 7 years, you'd snap it up, because you know it's going to go up fast. Not such a good thing when it's ice in Greenland. And it turns out that the ice in Antarctica, which were formerly thought to be really stable, are not so stable. So that is beginning to accelerate as well. So here's a point I think is interesting to think about, especially for young people in the audience. You hear oil and gas called the energy sector. Well, it's not really energy, it's fossil carbon. We should be calling it instead the feedstock sector. It only releases energy if you burn it. So, you know, it's not energy, it's something that can be burned to make energy. So these forms of fossilized carbon cannot properly be called the energy sector. Think of this group as feedstock sector, which may be transformed into an incredible number of carbon-based products called petrochemicals. Your grandchildren might want those things like epoxy and things in the future. Most of that's made from petrochemicals. So if you burn it all, not only does it wreck the climate, but it deprives you of feedstock. So we should save feedstock, not burn it. We need to have a way of pricing it so the petroleum companies can count it on their books as worth something, so they're not so freaked out. So we need to implement all the solutions in drawdown plus more, and we can make a lot of money doing this while we break the global warming juggernaut. We need to implement carbon fee and dividend, a policy to speed up and multiply the drawdown solutions. There is a very profitable low carbon future to be had, but we need it really fast or it'll be too late. So that's the key, we gotta do it fast. Short-term profits from burning these fossil carbon materials are dwarfed by the staggering cost of fortifying the global shorelines against sea level rise. New York City may be able to sue the major oil companies and put a barrier around lower Manhattan to protect that from sea level rise. That might work. But the amount of money required to deal with sea level rise on a global basis is astounding. It makes the amount of money that they're earning from carbon sales look like the lint in your pocket. It's not even small change. So when your grandchildren look back on today from the year 2050, what are they going to see? Did we protect both our economy and the environment by going all in toward carbon-free renewable energy? Did we phase out carbon combustion fast enough to save our favorite parts of coastal Florida and the Keys? Or all those things, a snorkeling tour? Your grandchildren will know how this movie ends. What can you say that you did to make a difference? So since global warming is an observed fact, where does all the controversy and debate come from you hear about on Fox News and things like that? You need to learn to respond to this kind of climate change denial. You can inoculate yourself against the disinformation published by Koch-funded organizations like Heartland Institute. Does not sound warm and fuzzy, the Heartland Institute, which you just love to do business with those. And they have another one called the Sparks of Freedom. I mean, doesn't that sound wonderful? Well, there's a guy named James Taylor who's a very effective, insidiously effective spokesman. You can take a course at University of Queensland in Australia called Making Sense of Climate Change Denial. So if you want to inoculate yourself against climate change denial, they also publish a lot of disinformation about renewable energy, saying it doesn't work and all kinds of baloney. There are a total of 837 institutional investors who have divested of fossil fuel stocks, totaling about $6 trillion. And they want to avoid a financial shock when the carbon bubble bursts. It turns out that the value of petroleum stocks depends on the amount of reserves they control. Well, if they're not allowed to produce those reserves in order to avoid global warming, those stocks and bonds and such are way overpriced, and there's going to be a day of reckoning. Many individual investors, like me, have come to the same conclusions. So I've contributed to Citizens Climate Lobby, purchased a Tesla Model S, installed a solar array with some of the proceeds from my trust and divestment. So you may have an account which has a Tesla sitting in it. You could be driving rather than having it in your safe deposit box. So with projections, which ones will we follow? This is a series of projections that was produced by the 4-County Climate Compact Sea Level Committee, which I served on. I've done both years that they've had it. And there are a bunch of lines here. And the question is, which one will we follow? The top one is the NOAA worst case, which is really kind of business as usual. That's the trend that we're on right now. The one at the bottom, the little dashed line, that's the one if we got really busy and changed our carbon system to a renewable system, that's the one we could have. And when you see the difference in the amount of sea level rise, it's pretty significant. Now, the actual curves will not look anything near as neat and tidy like that. Those are mathematical functions. There will be steps in these things as various ice bodies deteriorate. So if we do all 80 things suggested in drawdown, we could save $74 trillion more than business as usual. It's a mystery to me why you even think about doing business as usual. So I'm voting for the one on the low side here. That's the one I'm working for. I'm going to die with my boots on doing this. So here's the last 450,000 years from Greenland ice cores. These up and downs essentially are the glacial cycles. That's the bottom of the glacial period. That's the interglacial period. Maximum glaciation, interglacial, so forth. And in all this time, there has never been a CO2 above this dotted line. It turns out that a change of only 100 parts per million is enough to cause sea level to go up and down about 400 feet. So, you see what we're doing here? The 1950 we were here. The current level for CO2 is there. If you count the other greenhouse gases like methane, it's up that high. So if 100 parts per million makes 400 feet of sea level rise change, this is not going to be a small matter for us. The good news is that our climate system reacts very slowly. So if we really got busy and start sequestering the hell out of the carbon, we might be able to stop the worst of this before it even happens. The planet might not have time enough to fully adjust to that. So that's what I'm hoping and praying and working for. So if we started earlier when the oil companies first knew that we had a problem, it would be a whole lot easier than what we've got on our hands. So here's the deal. Get busy. You can fill out a constituent comment form. Let your congressman know about your attitudes on global warming. Do you think it's a big deal or not? Do you care? If you do, fill one of these things out. Let them know what you think. Google Citizens Climate Lobby. See what it's about. Go to the website. It's a really neat thing. You can join on the website. It costs nothing. You can attend the CCL second Saturday meeting in UM's Coral Gables campus in under room 230 CD. These are at high noon, second Saturday, same place every month, easy to remember. And see more CCL info at gregforgreen@gmail. And then I highly recommend that you buy a copy of Drawdown, edited by Paul Hawken, and available as a Penguin book or an ebook. This has the good news in it. We shouldn't just concentrate on the bad news, and there's certainly plenty of that, but there's actually good news too. So that's my recommendation. I always give a little homework. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'd be happy to entertain questions if you have any.
All right.
Oh, one more thing, sorry, I'm premature. There is a song sheet here. And one morning in the shower, I've been asking a couple of folk singers, could they make us some kind of a song about climate change and what to do about it? And I got nowhere with that. So one morning I was sitting in the shower and this occurred to me, there was an old jingle put together by Pepsi-Cola, and it goes to the same tune as that. So I'll sing it first, and if you guys would like to join me, I would be honored. So, carbon pricing hits the spot with refunds, the tax it's not, save the planet and prosper too. Carbon pricing is the thing to do. Okay, so get out your song sheet and follow along here, please. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Carbon pricing hits the spot with refunds, the tax it's not. Save the planet and prosper too. Carbon pricing is the thing to do. Okay, now we're for questions.
Also, I just want to remind you about the surveys. If you could try to fill them out, you can either leave them on your seat or give them to me or Becca before you leave. They're really important for us for the grants that we apply for as a citizen science project, which is part of the Key Biscayne Community Foundation. We're a nonprofit, so we're relying on donations and grants. So the surveys are really important for us. All right, does anybody have any questions?
Have you ever found a difficult place to charge your Tesla?
Autopilot will route you through the charging stations, the superchargers. So that's not a problem. Every house in America has electricity just about. I mean, there might be some up in the woods somewhere that don't, but you can get charge out of any place. If you have a dryer in your house, that'll charge a Tesla easily in about 3 or 4 hours. So yeah, that's not a problem. A destination charger, which I have in my garage, will do it in about 2 or 3 hours. The car software updates about every 2 or 3 weeks, so your car continues to improve. So I'm colorblind, so there's a little red arrow that shows the position of the car on the navigation screen, and I couldn't see it on a green background of the same value. And so I asked Tesla, would they put a little white edge on this thing? 2 weeks later, the next update, there was that white edge. Really neat. I don't know whether I was the only one to have the issue, but it was certainly gratifying to see that they responded. And when a friend of mine was called up by Tesla and they said, we noticed that you have a problem with your accessory battery. Well, he didn't know he had an accessory battery, much less of having a problem with it. And they said, we also noticed your home. Will you be there for 2 hours so our technicians can exchange your battery? I said, yeah. So they came out and did it. The last 2 service calls I've had have been in the Pavia garage on UM campus where I'm parked while I'm teaching. It's very convenient. It's a whole different world.
Can you just tell us whether the sequestration approach to getting rid of some of the carbon that's in the atmosphere already, do we have some viable methods?
Yeah, absolutely. There are many viable methods for doing that. Some of them are mechanical. Some of the CO2 from power plants has been sequestered directly in things like oil-producing shales and things like that. But there's a limited amount of storage there. The biological things, reincorporating it in your soil is a really big deal. So for instance, if you live in Iowa and you examine the height of a farm field next to a graveyard, the graveyard is 6 or 7 feet higher than a farm field because they've plowed the farm field so many times and they've exposed the carbon in the soil to oxidation, and it's now in the atmosphere. So we need to reverse that process. We need to do carbon farming. We can do this. Yeah, it might be a field, and in an increasing time of automation, I think there's going to be a lot of place for people who want to go back to the farm and experiment with this stuff. I mean, it's an all hands on deck. I mean, as a kid, I grew up in World War II. We had a victory garden. Half the vegetables in the United States came out of victory gardens, and we took good care of our soil. So it can be done. It's a whole matter of attitude.
Tidal energy, did you go through that? I may have missed it.
It's in one of the slender pie chart sections. It is possible. We've used tidal energy primarily in France. There was a big project proposed for the Bay of Fundy when Franklin Roosevelt was
I
president.
was thinking about Bay of Funding. Yeah.
Yeah, there is energy. It's a little tricky because when you start to extract energy, sometimes it causes the tide to get large in other places where it didn't used to be. It's very sensitive to disturbance, and so you have to be extraordinarily careful to model it. But there's a significant amount of energy. The present wave energy is another thing that is possible. South Florida does not have strong enough winds to be a strong wind place, but we sure have geothermal cooling in spades down here. We could use that. And we have a lot of solar energy. I've been at a solar rate for the last 5.5 years. So my power bills are about $10.
What do you do when you have an environmental conflict? I interned on Capitol Hill for a little while, and one of the women I worked with worked for BLM, the Bureau of Land Management. And I remember while I was there, one of the big victories they had is that they were able to get the lesser prairie chicken declared an endangered species, so it got protections.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is that prairies are a great place to set up wind energy.
Sure.
The big fans. Lesser prairie chickens are scared of tall structures. So you can't actually build things like that where they live now that they're protected.
You say they're chicken?
They are indeed. So in that case, obviously, like that was actually kind of a blow to wind energy, even though it was good for, you know, environmentalists that are worried about like the animals and things like that.
Sure.
What would you say about like where would you draw the line? Like how do you kind of decide which is more important, protecting like wildlife or like renewable resources?
Well, the easy answer is that there is so much area of rooftops available. We can supply our energy needs mostly with rooftops. We don't have to invade the prairie chickens' habitat. Wind energy, the best places for that are typically on ridge lines. If you go out west, you'll see a ridge line and there'll be windmills all down the length of it. It's easy to hook up to. The oil fields use an enormous amount of electricity. The amount of electricity it takes to refine a gallon of fuel is probably something like 6 or 7 kilowatt hours, which would take an electric car 100 miles. So it's, if we ever stop refining fossil fuel, we'll have all the energy we need to charge electric cars. And if you had an electric tractor, you could have a charging station on your windmill pylon. I mean, you wouldn't have to run wires very far. I mean, the opportunities are just absolutely stunning. And I think when Romney ran for president, he swore he'd take away Iowa's incentive for wind farms. And a lot of the farmers were already making a lot of money on the wind farms, and they were not too pleased with that stance. I think that's why he lost Iowa. And people in Pella make wind turbines. It's not just a matter of installing them. And of course, that's a majority Dutch ancestry community, so windmills are special. Or some people might think they're ugly. The Dutch certainly don't.
So in general, you think there's probably some kind of workaround?
I think there's a workaround for it. Yeah, I mean, the amount of bird strikes from windmills is far less than from automobiles, and I don't hear a big cry to get rid of all the automobiles in the United States. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'll be happy to stay off after and talk, and I have those constituent comment forms on the back table. If you would like to fill one of those things out, I'd be delighted. We are moving the needle in Congress in spite of the noises from the executive branch. We're making progress. And so if you'd like to help move the needle and lose a few of your inhibitions when it comes to lobbying, we'd be happy to help train you and help you become a certified CCL lobbyist. We're polite. You don't have to be rude. You don't have to get arrested. None of that. We'd be happy to have you. And children are particularly effective. We brought some high school students last year to lobby on Capitol Hill. Of course, you have to bring your mom or your dad or somebody as chaperone, but congressmen really have a soft spot for children. So if one of you guys wants to get involved, that's a very powerful thing. We had a young gentleman from Baylin, Jesuit, who made a big impression on Capitol Hill. And it turns out that Carlos Corbello is also a Baylin graduate, and they were wearing the Baylin school tie and all of that, so, yeah. Yeah, any kind of connection like that is powerful.
All right, thank you all very much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is, Drawdown is a book about solutions to global warming. It's the first time that all the information has been put together between two covers. And so it has a uniform way of modeling the solutions to climate change, uses the same mathematical approach, and it calculates the number of gigatons of carbon that are either avoided or sequestered by each of the 80 main solutions. And then it does a cost estimate. How much will it cost to implement this solution, and will it turn a profit? And most of these things turn a lot of profit. So there's a guy in Prince Edward Island that has a big herd of dairy cows, half of which eat in conventional fields and half of which go out on the beach to feed on seaweed. Turns out that the ones that feed on seaweed produce more milk and grow faster. And so the dairy farmer was naturally curious as to why this was, and he got a scientist who put a baggie on both ends of the cow so he could catch the emissions.
Wow.
And determined that these cows were emitting less methane.
Wow, that's
So
really interesting.
when you have anaerobic digestion, which produces methane, it is less efficient than aerobic digestion.
Right.
And so if you can reduce the amount of anaerobic digestion in these ruminant 5-chambered stomach setups they have, then you emit less emission of methane.
I mean, that makes sense. It's just
And so they,
weird.
yeah, and then they said, well, there may be another seaweed that's more efficient. And so they found a species in Hawaii that could reduce emissions of cattle emissions by 70 to 90% if you mixed as little as 2% with the feed.
Wow, that's huge.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So even the sacred cows in India still have emissions.
Oh, absolutely, they
So you
do.
should be feeding them some seaweed.
Yeah,
Yes.
they'd like that.
Okay, this one is called The Farewell to Ice. It's written by Peter Wadhams, who is one of the foremost authorities in sea ice on the planet. He's been studying it over 40 years. He was with the Scott Polar Institute in Cambridge University. He still is a faculty member in Cambridge, but he's no longer running the Polar Institute. So he wrote this book to tell people what is happening in the Arctic, how serious the situation is. And it's easy to become pessimistic when you read about the methane emissions that are happening both underwater and on the continental shelf, and on the land as well. So there's tremendous shifts in reflectivity of the northern part of the Earth, about a 50% decline in the albedo. So that means it's like turning the thermostat up, and the global warming effect will be equivalent to maybe 15 or 20 years, the last 15 or 20 years of global emissions. So it's a huge transition. And so we are racing to get these changes in carbon policy implemented before that whole system goes nuts. And we can't know exactly when that will be.
Right.
And so it's really necessary that we get going fast.
Right.
It's not enough that we do it, we have to do it fast.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm
Because
still.
we're getting close to that stage now, right, where it's like the tipping point where there's just no going back, and it'll just continue
Yeah, I mean,
to kind of cycle.
if we lose the sea ice, it's gonna make it
I mean,
very
that's
difficult.
Like, yeah.